Today I'm speaking with Thomas Kane. Tom is a former academic and an author of numerous books. And I, one of the reasons I was excited to hear from you and speak to you, Tom, is that I think that in these times when the culture is shifting a lot and we've kind of going through some kind of cultural revolution, it's cause for lots of concern. And we've spent a lot of time talking about what's going wrong and why we're so concerned about it. But it also is a time with a lot of potential for growth and creativity, especially around literature and the arts. And so I'm very interested in your perspective and how you've come to be where you are. So Tom, would you start by just giving a little bit of your background and what brought you into this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, sort of summing up, I was a senior lecturer in international politics at Britain's University of Hull for almost 20 years. And I've published 8 books and a lot of other stuff in my academic field. And that's and before that, sort of starting out in life, I was homeschooled, which I am extremely grateful for.
Mm.
And I'm really happy to see that more people doing that today, because it was fairly rare when I was that age. And sort of moving into the issue of my fiction and of how my fiction connects with the Cultural Revolution, as you put it, sort of an ominous term. And the I think maybe the best way into that is to start sort of from at the beginning of my academic career, because I'm quite fortunate. I left academics for personal reasons about a hair's breadth before the current stuff started.
Mm.
So I sort of missed out on real life politics in my political science career. Um, but I did have sort of a clash with the mainstream uh, when I was first doing my PhD. And that clash I had with the mainstream informs my writing
Mm.
in a lot of ways, and it sort of primes me for today's issues. And the story goes like this. I originally planned to be a pharmacist, and I went to university as an undergraduate, studying, preparing for pharmacy school. And along the way, I had an amazing teacher in political science, and amazing teachers are sort of a theme in my life. I'm going to be mentioning more of them as I go on. And the and this, due largely to that experience and what I learned there, I changed my plans and refocused on studying international relations. And to do anything with that, you need to go to graduate school. So I went to graduate school, and and as an undergraduate studying international relations, I studied things like current issues. This was in the 1980s, so the Cold War was the current issue, and well, I mean that's an oversimplification, but I studied what was going on in the world, and studied the historical backdrop to things that were going on in the world, and studied the details of other countries, the other cultures, other systems of government, you know other political ideologies, our own political ideology, at least what seemed like our political ideology at the time. And if I didn't mention foreign languages, I sort of should have said that. I had a wonderful opportunity to study Chinese as an undergraduate, and took advantage of it. And the and I sort of assumed that that was what studying international politics meant, and that was what I would go on doing in a sort of a more advanced way um, in graduate school. And what I discovered after a long and crazy bus trip to new university was that the once you pass that undergraduate level, once you pass that threshold, studying politics becomes very different.
Hmm.
And at least in America, in I'm I'm confident in saying that this hasn't changed, but I have been out of the field for a while, so if someone out there is in the field and says it's totally different, I'll have to listen. But the the once you get into academia as opposed to being a student, uh, the study of politics becomes highly theoretical, and not to put too fine a point on it, I would say that it diverges from reality.
Hmm.
You know, it's not just theoretical. It's I am. Well, I mean, obviously, I am very skeptical of the theoretical approach, and it's not just as I was to learn. Um, Other people have the same concern, and if you're interested in like pursuing this, the philosopher Leo Strauss has written about the wrong turn in political science, and so have many of his people who admire, people that are inspired by his work. Now, Strauss is very much from the conservative side of things, as with a lot of things in you know as with a lot of things, that's actually an oversimplification. But I think for purposes of this conversation, we can say Strauss is notoriously conservative, or Strauss's influence has been notoriously conservative. But this is not a partisan issue. Um, if from the other side of things, the feminist international relations theorist Jean Beth Elshtain has also talked and written about this topic. The topic of the discipline that studies international relations veering off from the reality of international relations. So this is something that has interested people has concerned people from all parts of the political spectrum. And in my own experience, I sort of encountered this, sort of have to rethink where I'm going. And at the same time as I was becoming disillusioned with the way the discipline was going, I also found more really amazing teachers. I was actually sort of a best of times, worst of times situation. Because on the one hand, it was becoming increasingly clear that I was going to struggle to find a career doing this, or I was just going to have to to pretend that I believed it. But at the same time, I was finding remarkable opportunities to learn the sorts of things I really wanted to learn and do the sorts of things I really wanted to do. And I had friends that were sort of in the same situation, and we sort of, each in our own ways, came to the conclusion that we don't know where this is going, but if we're going to go out, we're going to go out with a bang. So we challenged sort of some of the more mainstream ideas in our field. We were students. Our ability to challenge these things was limited. But we would do things like when guest speakers would come to campus to talk about sort of what the big people in the field were doing. We would go and ask tough questions, or what we hoped would be tough questions. And
were there specific things that you were disturbed by in the conceptual discussions of international relations and political science at the academic level, or was it just that it was different from the way things were being applied and studied at the more ground level?
Well, I'll try to give some examples. The school of thought that was dominant at the university I went to was quantitative studies, and the idea was that the study of politics could become a mathematical science. And a point I want to emphasize is that they meant this absolutely literally.
Okay.
I'm not just talking about using statistics to back up a point. I'm talking about trying to reduce politics to a small number of variables that you can assemble in a formula and then use that formula to predict the future. And again,
Wow.
that's
Okay.
what we talked about,
Mm-hmm.
and use that to, and presumably use that to come up with like, what should we do? What policies should we follow?
Mm-hmm.
And a term that, a commonly used term from people who are critical of this is physics envy.
Is what now? Physics envy?
Physics envy.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
The science of physics is,
Yeah.
it's not just that it's completely mathematical, it's that you sort of have one formula that covers everything. The formula, if you toss a ball in the air, you can use the laws of motion to figure out how far the ball is going to go. And if a star, if there's a supernova in another galaxy that sends a chunk of matter into space, you use exactly the same laws of motion and exactly the same equations to study the supernova. And that is that's the ideal of what they're going for in politics, in political science.
A simple framework.
Yeah. And of course, if it worked, it would be great. And so of course, and by the same token, if someone is inspired to study it, it's why not see where it goes. I personally am sort of skeptical that it will ever go anywhere, but maybe I'm wrong. I would not go that far. But what I would say is, at very least, it's not the only way.
Mm-hmm.
It's at this time, it's not the best way to study what's going on, and the people that believe in this approach tend to be quite dogmatic about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they tend to see what they're doing as more scientific than say studying history.
Yeah.
And they tend to take the position that for there to be progress, science needs to squeeze out non-science. So
Well, yeah, it seems like there's like this condescension towards social sciences from the hard sciences. You're not really doing your work is less empirical, it's less important. And then social sciences sort of have an inferiority complex as they try to match that and become more data driven and less, I guess, conceptual.
yes, and that condescension and that inferiority complex, those are the sorts of things that I had a problem with.
Mm.
And it's in, at least in sort of in my world, it was a fairly serious problem because those were the sorts of things that dominated the academic environment.
Mm.
People, yeah, I mean, enough said. It was very and to use a term that to use a political sciencey term, it was hegemonic.
Hmm. So you and some
And
colleagues found yourself in a position of, you said if you're going to go out, you're going to go out with bang. And what was that experience like? And what was the bang you had in mind?
well, the bang that we had in mind was basically just, saying what we thought. Not just shutting up and trying to do what other people were doing, but coming back with our own criticisms.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we had. I mean, obviously, we would have liked to have influenced people,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think we had a focused goal.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also just, I think, we sort of had the feeling that we might we might all be starting new careers in a couple of years. So we didn't feel like we had a lot to lose.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like? I mean, actually, those years were like, for me, they were like being a character in a movie.
Mm.
It was one of the most intense periods of my life, and it was there was constant in constant struggle, being a character in a movie, conflict and character development and that sort of thing. There actually was a well-defined story arc. You could make it into a movie without changing a lot. Um, and and it was, I mean, in some ways, it was, energizing, particularly because, as I mentioned earlier, it wasn't all confliction. I also had professors there that were very, were fascinating. Were teaching things that I very much did want to learn and find useful and find relevant, sorts of things that interested me. So it wasn't the story of that time was not only a story of arguments, but the arguments were there, and of course the future was very much in doubt, and it was I'm sort of thinking about conflicts today and with sort of the things that happen today. It does. I've gone back and I've been looking at some of the notes I took in that period, some of the things that other students said about me in that period, and like that, and it was also a bitter time, and there are certainly things from that time that aren't great. And another just aspect of the experience that I reflect on now, and is maybe in some way relevant for a long time after this. When I emerged from this environment, it was sort of hard to find my bearings again. I had gotten the conflict had become such a big part of my life that it was sort of I didn't quite know where to focus myself without it. I mean, it would have been one thing. I mean, resting on my laurels wasn't really an option, but at the same time, there was sort of a feeling in a I mean, missing it is the wrong word, but not, not knowing how to find. I guess I've said this, but not knowing how to find my bearings is the answer.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's sort of where you were going with that. If those are the answers you were.
Yeah, well, that's really. It sounds like it was a really significant experience, finding yourself at odds with the overall flow of your profession and having to decide whether or not that was enough to take a stand on and it was worth your career. What made you, do you feel like you were always someone who was able to step back and see bigger pictures, or what was your relationship to the mainstream, as you call it?
Well, yeah, there are a couple of things I can say to that. I mean, the first thing is that I honestly think I can put my hand on my heart and say that I was not looking for trouble. I was not, I had when I was an undergraduate, I had, I mean, human friction, but I had no significant conflict as an undergraduate. I had no, so I guess. I did not go to graduate school with the intention of being a troublemaker. Trouble found me, or at least that's my perception of it. Sort of at a deeper level of what is it about me, or what do I forget exactly how you phrase that.
Mm-hmm.
But another thing that you sparked with that is as to the question of why. Why do some people question these things and maybe not others? That is jumping to a slightly different place. That is sort of what I was exploring in my first novel series.
Mm.
my first novel series is I mean, again, this is slightly disjointed from what we were talking about a minute ago, but it is about it's basically a Cassandra story. It's about a woman who, over the course of her life, she becomes convinced that her country's enemies are preparing to invade. And this is against the narrative of her country and her time and her world. And so the tension of the story is she needs to convince she needs to convince people who can do something about this to do something about this. And it's four books, sort of following her from childhood to her 40s, which is when the war comes to a head. And the reason why I wrote it as a 4-book series and not as one book, the reason why I didn't start with the war, is that I am interested in the question of why do some people ask questions and other people accept the common wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And but to give a quick answer of why me in this case, I guess important factors would be one thing of course is that I did have other teachers who were encouraging me to follow the route I was following.
Mm-hmm.
And I did have an unusual period growing up. The idea that the mainstream might be wrong was nothing new to me. I had encountered. I mean, that's the homeschooling thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I had it, and so I certainly had support, and I certainly had prior experience and prior opportunities to reflect on these things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one thing, again, speaking of homeschooling, it's not just that my parents chose to homeschool me. It's that as at like I would say maybe 13 or 14, I was sort of interested in the well, I was sort of interested in the background of that. And there's a writer that I don't know. Do you read John Holt?
Oh, someone recommended one of his books to me, and I bought it, but I haven't read it yet.
I recommend him too.
Okay.
And the point I'm making is that when I was actually being homeschooled, I was also reading John Holt and thinking about why am I being homeschooled? What is this all about?
Right.
So I mean, I guess the point I'm making is that was an opportunity to start thinking critically about things that many people just accept as the way things have to be.
So that background was foundational in shaping the way that you interacted with the world as you got older and went into your career.
I think so.
Mm-hmm. Well, the example you gave of concerns that you had about the way that the political sciences were trying to break people down mathematically, breaking populations down mathematically in this formulaic way. When I did an undergrad in psychology, and then I'd always thought I was going to go to law school, but I liked the study of psychology so much. I found it so interesting that I considered a PhD in psychology, continuing to go in the academic route. I was really drawn to the field of counseling, but I was in my undergrad program was in a clinical psychology. The school had a really good clinical psychology department, and there was so much disdain for the field of counseling because it wasn't clinical. It wasn't sciencey enough. And I was kind of influenced to think that way about counseling as well through my discussions with my faculty mentor and other people in the program. And as I was considering, what do I want to do? I don't know if I still want to go to law school. I looked at other programs, and there was a PhD in applied demography. that was being offered at another university. And so I looked at that and briefly considered that as well, because I always found sociology so interesting. And it sounds like the way that I've been thinking about this sort of identity politics, what's happening right now in terms of breaking people down into demographic categories, it very much resembles that. It's like sociology escaped the lab. It's like a sociology is becoming applied in this way, this demography. And that thing that you were experiencing earlier on, it's like you described it as being a hair's breadth before the current thing we're seeing, but it very much has the sense, or it seems to me like the growth of this, and this is just what it grew into. That same thing you're describing. It's the breaking people down into discrete categories for dissection and investigation and easy, I don't know, data collection. So is that the way you see that as well? Is that?
Yeah, I'm right there with what you said.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's I think that reduction of people to categories
Mm-hmm.
is concerning.
Yeah.
And is a theme that runs through all of this. And I'm inclined to suspect that demography. I'm inclined to suspect that what was going on in the different disciplines was sort of all part of the same movement.
Mm.
It's not as they used to say in the Soviet Union. Is when I have the image anyway of when they give speeches in the Politburo of some old party hack saying it is no coincidence, comrades, that the imperialists it is no coincidence that psychology was pushing that, and was the demographics was it billed as psychology or was it billed as sociology?
Sociology.
Yeah. The sociology
Mm-hmm.
was pushing demographics at the same time as these other things
Mm-hmm.
going on.
Mm-hmm.
And another sort of like thing that I'll add to that is when I answered your question, I focused on quantitative political studies because that was what my school focused on.
Mm-hmm.
There were other schools, other universities, other places I could have gone to graduate school that were less quantitative focused, but I do not actually think that it would have been very different. Mm-hmm. I think that the reduction of people and human activities to abstractions is a common feature of many schools of thought, if that made sense. You can do it in a very mathematically oriented way, or you can do it in sort of a more conceptually and philosophically oriented way. But you're still taking people's consciousness and agency and humanity out of the picture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting because you're talking about sort of the difference between concretizing these assumptions about the individual versus turning individuals into archetypes, and sort of like two ends of the spectrum, kind of, that both lose sight of the humanity of the individual.
I think that's well put.
And so you made the decision to speak up about what you were seeing and voice your concerns about the direction things were going, and took your career in a different direction at some point.
Yeah. To wrap up sort of my personal story, I was living this life, doing these things, and the career situation, was getting, the walls were closing in on me a little bit, closing in on my friends a little bit, and my friends and I sort of got more desperate. A group of us, three of us, put out an alternative campus newsletter
Oh, wow.
which we called it the plague,
The
because we were
plague?
spreading the plague.
Oh, wow.
And we would go around, early in the morning. We would go around and leave a bunch of them on a table, put one on a bulletin board, and there are other people that would you know get rid of them as soon as they found them. But
Huh.
we were distributing them as fast as we could. So we did that, and it was kind of fun and kind of subversive, and also well, doesn't really change much. But at that point, that was all we could think of. Um, and in the course of this, a professor from a British university came to visit the campus. His name was Colin Gray, and I don't know if I don't think, unless you're in the field, I don't know if that name. I don't know if he, but he take my word on it. If you were in the field, it was a name. I mean, he was someone that I had heard of before he ever came. He was someone, sort of, academic famous, and so it was kind of exciting for Colin Gray to come. And
How do you spell his
and
last name?
Gray, like the color gray.
Grey?
Well, actually, Gray,
Gray. Colin Gray.
which
Okay.
is, I mean, I know what you're saying. In England, the color gray is spelled with an E,
Hmm.
but his last name was spelled with an A.
Okay.
Uh, the and in America, well, I mean, we don't. But in any case, so he was coming, and he was coming to give us a talk. But my mentor, a professor that I had worked with very closely, sort of talked to a few people and arranged for me to have coffee, Colin Gray. So that was great. Well, I mean, I got to meet him in person, got to talk with him one on one, and it seemed very informal and very sort of, very just sort of friendly. And he asked me what I was interested in writing my PhD thesis on, and in America it would be called a dissertation. Again, an English and American thing. In America, it's usually called a dissertation. In England, it's usually called a thesis. But in any case, what I was interested in doing my research on, I told him. We talked about that a bit, and sort of seemed like that was going to be the end of it. Until about 2 weeks later, when I got a letter from him, formally inviting me to come to England and finish my PhD studying with him,
Hmm.
which I did.
Sounds like a great
And
opportunity.
I mean, it was a life-changing opportunity.
Hmm.
And and I was speaking of sort of academic culture and what theories are dominant.
Mhm.
British, at least in political science, the British attitude is different from the American attitude, and I don't want to cast this as Britain good, America bad, but for me at that stage of my career, Britain being in Britain gave me a lot more. I wasn't my approach wasn't as strange in Britain. I the things that I was interested in doing fit in a lot better. So by going to Britain, not only did I have Colin Gray as my supervisor, but I just I was much more compatible with what other people were doing. So I finished my PhD with a minimum of drama, and got a job, which I had for 18 years, and I feel the again there's a lot to be said about the academic profession and the way things are going, but as a follow up to the story I've been telling, I feel very happy with the way it ended. I got to as I mentioned, I've published books in my field and supervised other PhD students and traveled to interesting places, and you know had set myself up to 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 move on and do what I'm doing now.
So it felt like you were able to have a successful career that went well despite your reservations early on about the field.
Yeah, Well, again, I think the going to England was what changed things.
Hmm. The different atmosphere, the different um, sort of political climate around the field that you were in there made it much more palatable for you,
Yeah.
and was more in line with your thinking. So you weren't as at odds with the field.
Yeah. I mean, just one sort of symbolic difference. We were talking earlier about the condescension and assumption that and condescension and inferiority complex.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in um, in 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 Britain, it's not called political science; it's called political studies.
Okay.
There is
Yeah.
usually, I mean, again, none of these things are hard and fast, but
Mm-hmm.
commonly it is. And no, I mean that is a meaningful distinction.
It is.
There is much more of an attitude of we're not we're not seeking to make this a science.
Mm-hmm.
We're studying the subject.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is a really interesting distinction. That does seem meaningful.
I felt that it was.
And so at some point you decided to start focusing on writing fiction. Had you always been a story writer, or was this something that emerged later in your career?
It was what I had always wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mean seriously, when I was planning to be a pharmacist, I was really envisioning that as sort of a day job.
Ah.
And when I switched to when I switched to academia, um, one of the main draws for me was you know the writing. The writing was a big part of the job description,
Mm-hmm.
and the transition into writing novels. I mean, sort of was an outgrowth of the experiences I've been talking about, because the sort of focus. I've mentioned I've mentioned the positive aspects of my early graduate school days, and the fact that I had some very good teachers. Um, One of those teachers in particular um, really encouraged me to explore what had been going on, in the Cold War, and the and was very a just mind blowing educational experience, and b sort of connected to the other things we were talking about in listening to him and in following up on the thing on his ideas. Um, I sort of came around to the conclusion that a lot of what I'd previously been taught about the Cold War was not wrong, but not focusing on the right thing.
Hmm.
And in addition to what I had been, what one learns in university classes about it, that a lot of the public discourse had been in the West.
Mm-hmm.
Well, probably in the Soviet Union too, but I'm focusing on the West. A lot of the public discourse had been, missing the main points,
Mm.
and this I mean, this had actually been very dangerous,
Mm.
and this sort of became this seemed to me as if it had huge potential for a story, and particularly because sort of one of my feelings as a reader and someone who enjoys storytelling, um, was that people had really underused the Cold War as a story setting.
Hmm.
It and it had, I mean, obviously it's not that they didn't use it at all, but it's that and it's not that no one ever wrote a good Cold War story. I think that there's a British TV show called The Sandbaggers that
Hmm.
I highly recommend.
Sandbaggers.
Yeah, it's spies.
Okay.
But on the whole, a lot of what was popular and well known either brushed over it entirely, or made it something cartoonish, or again sort of missed the point. There was this genre of World War III novels, and I mean again, no criticism for people. I mean they for people that like them. I mean they did their thing, but they did not do what I would have done. They tended to be very much focused on, okay, we need a war to start because that's the premise of the story, and then talking very much about the hardware and the tanks and that sort of thing, and again, if that interests you, awesome. But what
So
I would have
you saw a lot of rich
with,
potential in the Cold War.
Yeah,
for more further exploration.
Yeah, what I would have liked to have seen, yes, more exploration. I would have liked to have seen something sort of more focused. A model that I would have been Herman Wouk's book about World War II, The Winds of War, which is very much about how it affected, followed one particular family and how it affected each member of that family. And I would have liked to have seen something, portraying this, not just as an opportunity to get your tanks out, but portraying sort of the great cataclysm and how something coming like an axe through people's lives and changing everything. I was interested in exploring it sort of from that more human dimension. And I was well, I mean there were that's one example. There were a lot of things that seemed to me to be very obvious. That were being missed, and so I started thinking about what can I do with it, and rather than trying to write it in a completely realistic way, I wanted to write fantasy anyway. That was sort of where I was headed, but I felt that it would, rather than trying to engage with people's preconceptions about what would or would not have happened in real life, that it would be better just to put it in a completely imaginary world. So that if somebody says, so that we wouldn't really have to get bogged down in discussions of, was this totally realistic?
Historical accuracy.
Yeah. And so I was coming up with, so I worked out what has become my Mara of the League series, sort of with that in mind. And initially, my primary goal at first was just to tell a good story. As I got closer to, and actually, I mean, that was my goal sort of up until the second book. And as I got the second book out, and sort of had to start trying to sell these books. This was late 2018, early 2019, and so I got onto social media, which social media had completely passed me by until then. I was. And a lot of things had passed me by until then. And that was when I got hit in the face with the current cultural situation. And at that point, it started, the books that I had been writing anyway started to seem, I started to see sort of a cultural and political purpose to them that hadn't seemed quite so urgent before. There's although I'm right, although the Mara series was was about a slightly different, premise. It was more about conflict with an external totalitarian power than an internal cultural thing. There was still a lot of crossover. So at that point, I began to think sort of more intentionally about the contemporary relevance to what I was writing, and to do what I could to create something from the current situation, and also to express some thoughts on it, to say some things that I hope that people other people that are concerned about the current situation might resonate with, to say some things that I hope that maybe people who have not taken a position will think about when they encounter these issues in real life, etc.
It sounds like the thread that's sort of the underlying value that runs through a lot of these experiences for you, from being a child and a young person studying at home educated, and also studying about home education, reading John Holt, and then going off to school and into academia and encountering this institutional distillation of people down to categorical, qualities, or the archetypification of people in these broad sweeping conceptual categories. And then moving into your fiction, it's all been that there's been this common value through all of that in you, of the importance of individuality, individual creativity, and nuance, and the complexity of the individual experience.
I'm very happy with the way you summarized that. I think that individual experience and the complexity and nuance of individual experience are very much what I'm trying to get at.
Can you tell me a little bit about this book? This is the book that you sent to me, The People versus Abigail Bennett. And how does this book work to express some of these themes? Because I think that was, I'm very much looking forward to reading this and excited to, this is at the top of my list.
I'm so happy to hear that. I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you.
And the here's sort of a quick, here's the political exegesis of the People versus Abigail Bennett. I've mentioned that my first series builds up to a world war, and the People versus Abigail Bennett takes place in the backdrop of that. It's about the main character of the first series is a woman named Mara, and Abigail Bennett is her mother. And Abigail starts out as a farm wife, but she's in midlife. She she jumping over a few things. She becomes a lawyer, and by this time she's 78 years old. She's putting her law practice on. She's basically retired from her law practice, and the war breaks out, and an invading army sweeps over her town. So she's living under enemy occupation, and really she's just trying to survive. And that's how the book begins. She's just like hoping to live through this, and the invaders do not want to leave their own troops to garrison the town because the war is still going on. They're continuing to fight. So they pick local supporters of their ideology, and so they take local people that like what they're doing, and they have those people form an occupational government. And in the middle of this, one of the messengers from the invading army gets killed on the road, which is a question. Who did it? Is this a resistance movement springing up? Well, the people leading the occupational government decide they have to put this down. They have to make an example of someone fast, so that more messengers don't get killed. So that there's no, so that they can keep power. And so they grab a couple of teenagers to make them scapegoats. And at this point, Abigail Bennett has to ask herself: is she just going to watch this happen? She let a couple of kids get executed for this, and she decides that no. She decides to come forward and challenge people running the town and insist on a fair trial, and insist that she be allowed to defend them in the way that she would have defended someone back when there were courts
Mm-hmm.
back in the previous society. And the story, so that's the premise of the story. Abigail coming forward to make the case for due process
Mm-hmm.
and individual rights, and those sorts of principles. A lot of the book looks back at earlier stages of Abigail's life, and also it looks at the leader of the occupational government, a woman named Alex, and it looks back at her life, sort of to show how have their experiences brought them to this moment, and what are their perspectives on their society and on
Mm-hmm.
political and moral principles,
Mm-hmm.
and how do their perspectives clash, and how do how are they the same? They're actually, one thing that comes out is that they are both in their way reformers, just in their passion for reform takes them in very different directions.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's really fascinating. And it sounds like the dilemma faced by Abigail when she's trying to decide that she's going to stand up for these teenagers, whether to watch them get railroaded or whether to do something about it, is that same dilemma of moral courage that's facing so many people in the issues that we are discussing today, about whether to go along with something that you disagree with just because that's the easier route for you, or whether you should take a risk and go against the grain when you're experiencing something you feel is wrong.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm trying to explore, hey, moral courage.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's incredibly interesting, and I am really, as I said at the outset of this conversation, I'm excited to see the kind of art and literature that is starting to develop around this. It does, these times of tension and conflict can give rise to great creative developments. And so I am excited to see how you've explored this and look forward to reading this. And I'm really grateful for the conversation today and for you reaching out to me.
Well, thank you. I am deeply honored to have the opportunity to appear here. And speaking of the owl of Minerva flying at dusk, the things that the current situation is bringing forth, I really admire what you've done and what you're doing. I was really excited when I discovered your YouTube channel. It was time something like that existed.
Well, thank you very much. Where can people go to find more of your work and follow what you're doing, Thomas?
Well, thank you for putting that out there. Begin with, the books are available on Amazon, and the Marrow of the League series is also available as audiobooks, and the audiobooks are available on a lot of different platforms. You can get them on Amazon or Audible. You can get them on Kobo. I don't have them all memorized, but if you like audiobooks, most places that sell audiobooks will have them. And another thing that I would like to ask anybody who's interested is, if you enjoy my book, if you like what I'm doing, please tell people about them. I am at a stage where publicity is very, very helpful. Word of mouth is the best, is the gold standard. So you would be helping me a lot if you just wrote on your social media, I read this and it was okay, or whatever. And reviews on Amazon are very helpful too. So I would very much appreciate that. Also, I have a website, which is thomasmkane.com. And if you go on there, you can there's a link to sign up for a newsletter that I put out, which is free, comes out every month, it includes news about books that I'm writing. I mean, right now I'm actually writing a novel fiction set at a university. So again, it's fictional university, but it explores some sort of broad themes that come out of that time of my life. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned. The newsletter also has original content, so it actually will have stuff for you to read.
Awesome.
I've been doing a series of short and hopefully humorous anecdotes about experiences I've had involving coffee, and other stuff too. So again, thomasmkane.com. I would also be interested in hearing from you personally. If you are interested in any of these themes, interested in my books, interested in academia, I would like to. I think one awesome thing about the Radical Center about is that it's a place for people that are concerned about the current situation to find out that they're not alone, or to find out what other people are saying and doing. And I would like to promote and continue that as well. So get in touch, subscribe with my newsletter. The books are on Amazon. The titles, if you're interested in that, are we've been talking about The People versus Abigail Bennett, which is sort of you can read it by itself. You can also read it as a sequel to the Mayor of the League series. I don't know.
Yeah. That's
hard to bring it into focus.
It's a really interesting cover art. Yeah. So it's Thomas M. Kane, KANE.com.
Yes. And the other series, as I've been saying, is Mayor of the League. The first book in it is The Witches of Granite Dale, then The Rebels of Car City, The Hideous Garden, and The Rending of the World.
Oh, wow. Those are great names. Interesting. Awesome. Well, Tom, I'm so grateful for your time today, and thank you again for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.